Hello everyone, it's David again, talking about Babylon 5 Season 1, Episode 14, TKO, which for those of you who are not boxing fans or MMA fans means technical knockout. Standard knockout is when you hit the girl and she crumples to the floor and the referee gives you a 10 count. Now, a technical knockout can be several different ways. One of the most common is called 3 downs, technical knockout, where you hit the person, they go down, they get up by a standing count of 8, but if you do that 3 times in a row and the other person's just not intelligently defending themselves, you can get what's called a TKO, or technical knockout. The referee will stop the fight and the person scoring the technical knockout wins, and it counts as a win in your sport, and everybody on your team goes happy, happy, Ray. So I'm going to kind of change things up a little bit. This episode is widely panned, and I can kind of see why, because unless you're an actual boxer or MMA fan, probably not much in it for you. The other thing is, it's death, basically, and how we deal with death. And so a lot of people in the discussion groups widely panned this episode. And so I'm going to change things up a little bit. Instead of me just regurgitating the episode and providing little hints on when memes are going to fall here and there, I'm going to take a couple of themes and just extrapolate on those themes. Things that people don't commonly know about. Now, having been a registered nurse, I've sadly had to go in on a lot of death and bereavement exercises, or whatever you want to call them. I think one of the most beautiful ones was a South Vietnamese gentleman who was dying, and they had such a large family. We closed off. It was a double room. It was meant for 2 people. We just closed off the other bed because the whole family clan got together. And they had all these big ornate gold icons throughout the room, and they had candles, which you're not supposed to have. Some of them were electric candles, some were real candles, and I just basically, because there were so many of them, I wasn't going to go run in there and be Nancy Nurse. You can't have the open flame, the fire department won't let. I just told them, I'm like, when you're putting those out, be really, really careful and don't set off the smoke alarm, and they didn't. They were very gracious. It also kind of struck me too, because they were trying to get a hold of a Vietnamese Buddhist priest at that time. The only ones in the local area are Vietnamese Catholics, and so we were trying to go back and forth. And lo and behold, as I was getting a hold of one, they actually managed to, on their cell phone, get a hold of a Buddhist priest in, I think it was Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City it's now called, and they were able to just go and do their prayers over the phone. They grabbed me in and said, can you come just join us in this one prayer? And they, you don't have to do anything, just, kind of be respectful and stuff. I said, sure, why not? It was really interesting to do that. I've been in on Catholic ceremonies, on the deaths, Tibetan Buddhist ceremonies. Another beautiful ceremony I got into was a Native American ceremony. You come in and there was all these lovely flowers all over, and rose petals and everything everywhere. It was just quite an ornate ceremony. Now, I'm sure you say, David, what does that have to do with Babylon 5? Well, in the opening scene, we have a boxer named Walker Smith, and this guy who's obviously a Jewish rabbi, and they evidently struck up a conversation on the trip over, and then they were just separating and saying, hey, good luck in your travels. So, at this time, Michael Garibaldi is busting some drug dealers from MedLab. I wonder what their connection was. Someone's on the take in MedLab or something like that. And I can tell you, as a nurse, it sadly happens even to medical professionals. Because of my history of recovery and alcoholism, I often got stuck. I shouldn't say stuck, but I got placed with the nurses who had addiction issues because it was felt that I would better catch these people if they relapsed, which I actually have had to do, I think, twice in my career, where I've caught somebody actively using. But anyway, Michael Garibaldi grabs the guy, punches him, knocks him down. This guy was about to take out, or had taken out a blade, was about to stab Garibaldi from behind, and all of a sudden we see this fist come right out and knock the guy out cold, and lo and behold, it's Walker Smith, who just got off the transport with the rabbi. And this Walker Smith obviously has or knows Michael Garibaldi from a past history they had. So, as that's going on, they cue the entrance, and we segue into Michael Garibaldi eating something akin to a hamburger, and he sits down with Walker Smith to catch up on old times, and Walker Smith is like, "Is that water I see in your glass and not a beer?" And he goes, "Yep, had to give up the hard stuff years ago." And so they sit down and reminisce about that. Rabbi Kozlov goes to Ivanova and talking and opens up the door. Obviously, Ivanova knows this gentleman, was obviously her rabbi. We'll find out later that it was St. Petersburg or Leningrad. I can't remember if they had changed it at this time or not. Anyway, it may have been Leningrad technically at this time, but very shortly it was changed afterwards back to its old name of St. Petersburg. Now, they kind of go back and forth, and it talks about sitting Shiva, and Ivanova refuses to do that. Now, I was like, well, what does sitting Shiva mean? S-H-I-V-A. And in the United States, we give our bereavement, we get 3 days of paid bereavement leave, and that's all. Now, I can tell you, having been a nurse who has lost his mother and his father and a whole host of aunts, uncles, cousins, and relationships, 3 days is not nearly enough. I mean, I had a cat that was, God, she was about 22 years old. And when that cat died, I mean, my God, for over a month and a half, I was like a walking zombie around my house. But anyways, against our Jewish, I guess our Jewish friends, they get a whole week, because Shiva in English literally means 7. And that's all. I thought there was some big meaning behind this important thing, and no, it just means 7 in English. So it's considered a great mitzvah, or an act of kindness. What are the other mitzvahs then to our Jewish brothers and sisters? Because I would be interested, because if it's just sitting Shiva for somebody, I would make a very uninteresting Jew. But anyways, some of the things that I found on researching it was you're expected to provide food for the mourners. And food for a Shiva basket is generally consists of baked goods and desserts, fruit, dried fruit, nuts, and assorted chocolates. Now, during Shiva, when you're sitting Shiva for somebody, is it Shiva or Shiva? I think I just asked that earlier. Anyway, old age. Anyway, if someone who's Jewish can or speaks Hebrew can correct me on my pronunciation, but my understanding is you're not supposed to do anything enjoyable, such as, cutting your hair, shaving, having sex, listening to music, or watching TV. Well, isn't assorted chocolates you're supposed to put in the basket, isn't that a joyful thing? So I'm kind of confused on that one. So if anyone who's Jewish can correct me, please do so down in the comment section. You're supposed to follow Jewish customs when you're at this person's house. Mirrors are covered. I'm not sure what that's about, but anyway, and leather shoes are not to be worn. Again, I confused on that one. If someone can, and you're supposed to sit on low, uncomfortable seats and stools. Well, when they eventually do sit Shiva for Commander Ivanova, they were all sitting in nice leather couches. So I'm confused. Or you can also do a Jewish memorial candle. You're supposed to keep it lit for 24 hours a day times 7 days total. And that's also considered sitting Shiva. And you're supposed to perform daily prayers at the person's house who's sitting Shiva. And I found that non-Jews were welcome. And you're supposed to end sitting Shiva properly. There are certain Bible verses that you're supposed to recite. And it says here, non-Jews are welcome, but is it throughout the whole thing that non-Jews are welcome? Or just certain parts? Because as we find out, Commander Sinclair also ends up sitting Shiva, even though he's not a Jew, and ends up the morning prayer, M-O-U-R-N-I-N-G, mourning, as in I'm in mourning for someone lost, not mourning, M-O-R-N-I-N-G, which is when the sun comes up. So, supposed to do the morning prayer in Hebrew, but she does it in English at the very end. We flash on backwards and forwards between Walker, who evidently was set up in his last fight and ended up getting banished from the league. And he wants to come to Babylon 5. They have something called the Mutai, which is some sort of, I guess, like an MMA equivalent. And I had to, and he was kindly rebuffed at first. And it kind of goes back and forth. We find out that Sinclair was unaware of Ivanova's dad passing away. And so it kind of goes a little bit back and forth about how Ivanova doesn't want to sit Shiva. She finally realizes that she's not done with her father's passing away, as she eventually does end up sitting Shiva at the very end. Now, for those of you who are unaware, I kind of researched because I know what boxing is. But how do you explain it to somebody if they're a non-American, say from the deepest parts of Africa or Cambodia or something? How do you explain boxing to someone who's never seen it before and doesn't have it? So I looked up, boxing is a combat sport, okay, yeah, that emphasizes punching and striking. Okay, that I'll buy, you know. Certainly when you're throwing your fists at somebody, it's punching. Opponents and participants usually wear protective gloves, hand wraps, and mouth guards, which the mouth guards are actually also to prevent from concussion, the whiplash from concussion. Interesting enough. And sometimes helmets. I know in the United States it's a strictly regulated sport, and so during most of your pre-professional career you'll wear a helmet. During your professional career, depending on the state, you'll wear a helmet or not wear a helmet, depending on the type of bout that you're having. Boxing is overseen by a referee. One of my favorite was Mills Lane, but you know. Anyway, and it's usually a predetermined number of rounds, and it widely depends on, is it pre-professional, or amateur, I should say, more succinctly, or if it's a professional. Professional will go at least 8, most likely 10 or 12, especially for a championship round. And let's see here. Oh, started as an Olympic sport at 688 BC. The more recent re-inclusion back in as an Olympic sport was 1908 at the Olympic Games there. Some of the criticisms of boxing is that you can kill the other person, especially if you do what we call rabbit punches. Around behind to your back is where your kidneys are. And in fact, in most boxing federations in the United States at least, rabbit punches are illegal because you can seriously, your kidneys are right there and you can seriously destroy someone's kidneys and you can kill them. And people have died in the middle of the ring. And there's now a new thing coming on, and it started with professional American-style football when they found all these people were getting concussions repeatedly, getting what we call post-concussive syndrome. People were also now having the same problems with professional boxing. One of the most famous episodes was Muhammad Ali. He ended up getting severe multiple sclerosis. A lot of people attribute it to boxing. Now, of course, fans of boxing will point out that it is an amazing way to get in shape. It is an amazing aerobic sport, and in fact, a lot of aerobic classes in the United States will have some form of hooking or punching, counter-punching, things of that nature as part of an aerobic routine to get in shape. So, kind of though, as they were going through and this Walker guy's getting rebuffed by all these aliens, it kind of reminds me of, and this was taking place originally, I believe in 93, 94, which is about the same time a lot of Asian sports were making their big push into the United States. And this kind of begs the, MMA, and I think it's pancrase being one of the other ones. For those of you who aren't aware, go back and look at some of those MMA matches. It literally was anything go. You would have a 110-pound guy against a 600-pound guy on another side, and they just wailed on each other until one of them was knocked senseless. Well, people realized all of a sudden you're going to end up killing each other literally in the ring, so they started imposing more and more rules. And, of course, it became heavily westernized. People like Dana White helped in on that and, of course, made a ton of money. So it begs to ask the question, as these aliens were talking about Walker Smith fighting in the Mutari, which is Babylon5's version of MMA fighting. Are Americans and Westerners going over there and taking other people's culture and sports and ripping it off? Is it becoming too much, is what I'm trying to get at. And I'd be interested to know what your thoughts are down below. For instance, Muay Thai, very famous Thai combat sport involving a lot of knee strikes. You ever want to see concussion in action, is watch a Muay Thai specialist knee strike someone in the head half dozen or a dozen times. That also, of course, in fact, they even made it, humans have no place in the Muay Thai, not now, no, nor ever. Are we going over into these cultures that we have no idea what we're doing? We're ripping off their sports and throwing them with an American touch, as they say, and $1 billion, and is it becoming too much? At this point, this was before MMA was a multi-billion-dollar sport. And so I think that's what JMS was getting at. Flash back onto Commander Ivanova's quarters, and we find out that her heritage was a Semivar, which is a water heater used for making tea. And this was passed down in her father's family since the day of the Tsars, which would be 1918 now. If this is 2258, that thing is, what, over 250 years, what, 350? My math is terrible, but it's old. Can imagine when it gets on eBay at that point in time. Of course, you'd have to prove that it's really that old. Interesting thing, question I came along is, Rabbi, of course, said shalom, which is also used a little bit in Christianity. And I was told that it's a phrase kind of like aloha in Hawaiian. It's a greeting, going away, good wishes kind of a thing. So anybody who's native Hawaiian, down below, do you think shalom is the same thing as aloha? And also, to other people from other cultures, please comment down below. Do you guys have a saying like that? Romanian might be like bună ziua. German would be Guten Morgen, things like that. Let's see here. Susan eventually ends up sitting Shiva. We find out that she's from St. Petersburg. Evidently some random people were there, probably some members of the Jewish community that the rabbi was kind enough to get. And we see her sitting Shiva, and finally she breaks down towards the end. Then we flash on back over to Walker, who is a classically trained boxer versus an MMA fighter. I'm sorry, I love boxers to death. I think it's a wonderful sport, but no way on God's green earth do I think in less than 3 days of training a classically trained boxer is going to ever beat an MMA fighter who's, you know, the best of the best on, you know, 100 different planets or whatever it is. But anyway, he ends up fighting the guy to a draw. And he ends up getting, we'll see a little snippet from ISN talking about Walker and his attempt to go into the Muay. And Walker and this other guy fight to a draw, and everybody goes yay and starts chanting for the human at the end. And we find out later that Walker and his plans for the future is going to go fight the Paul brothers. So, anyways, I'd like to get your opinion on who would win in 300 years from now if the Paul brothers ever do fight Brian Walker. As always, comment below, like, comment, subscribe, and share. Hope you all have a good evening.